Love isn't supposed to leave bruises. But Sienna didn't know that when she was lying on her bedroom floor at 28 years old, hair ripped from her scalp, mascara streaking down her face on what was supposed to be her birthday. She didn't know that when Derek's hand closed around her throat for the third time that month. And she definitely didn't know that 6 years earlier when he first walked into her life with roses and promises that made her heart skip. This is the story of how she survived the man who almost destroyed her and found the love that finally healed her. But before healing, before hope, before freedom, there was the fall. 22-year-old Sienna was everything Derek wanted. Fresh out of college, working her first real job as a marketing coordinator, she had this glow about her, the kind that comes from still believing the world is fundamentally good. She had close friends who knew all her secrets, parents who called every Sunday, and a tiny apartment she decorated with thrift store finds and dreams of the future. She was whole. She was happy. She had no idea she was prey. Derek was 30 when they met at a networking event downtown. Confident in that way that makes everyone in the room turn and look. Successful, charming, deliberate. He didn't just ask for her number. He pursued her like she was the only woman who'd ever mattered. Flowers delivered to her office with handwritten notes. Dinner reservations at restaurants she couldn't afford. Text messages that came exactly when she needed them, like he could read her mind. And maybe that should have been the first red flag, how perfectly he seemed to understand her, how completely he consumed every corner of her attention. But Sienna wasn't looking for red flags. She was falling in love. Those first 6 months felt like a fairy tale someone had written specifically for her. Derek told her she was beautiful when she woke up with bedhead and no makeup. He said she was intelligent when she rambled about work drama. He held her face in his hands and whispered that he'd been waiting his entire life for someone exactly like her. And Sienna, sweet, trusting Sienna, believed every single word. She moved into his apartment before her lease was even up, ignoring the small voice in her head that said it was too fast, too intense, too much. That voice would get quieter over the years. Eventually, it would disappear entirely. The change didn't happen overnight. It never does with men like Derek. It started with a comment at breakfast one morning, casual as poison. "Are you really wearing that? It's a bit tight, don't you think?" Sienna looked down at her dress, the blue one she loved, the one he'd complimented a dozen times before. She changed. 2 weeks later, over dessert at her favorite restaurant. "Maybe you should skip that. You've been eating a lot lately." Sienna put down her fork. The next time they went out, she ordered a salad. Within months, she was second-guessing every choice she made, every outfit she picked, every bite of food she took. Derek's voice had become the loudest one in her head. Then came the isolation, wrapped in concern so convincing she didn't even fight it. Her best friend Rachel was clearly jealous of their relationship. Her co-worker Emma was obviously interested in breaking them up. Her college roommate was toxic and holding her back. Derek would sulk when she made plans with them, his jaw tight, his silence suffocating the apartment until Sienna would cancel, apologize, promise she'd rather be with him anyway. And eventually she stopped making plans at all. The texts from her friends went unanswered. The invitations dried up. The connections severed. Within a year of living with Derek, Sienna's phone had stopped ringing. She told herself it didn't matter. She had Derek. Derek was all she needed. But Derek wanted more than her time. He wanted her money too. "Let's combine our finances," he suggested one night, his hand warm on her knee, his smile soft in the dim light. "For our future." For us. It sounded romantic, 2 people becoming one, sharing everything. So Sienna added her salary to the joint account, and Derek took control of every dollar. New work clothes? Why do you need those? Who are you trying to impress? Coffee with a former co-worker? You're wasting our money on people who don't matter. A birthday gift for her mother? We can't afford that right now. Except they could. They just couldn't afford Sienna having any independence, any autonomy, any escape route, and by the time she realized that, she was already trapped. Her family noticed first. Her mother's voice over the phone carried worry like weight. "Sweetheart, you sound different. Are you okay? We barely see you anymore." But Derek was ready with explanations that somehow always made perfect sense. Your parents never approved of me. They want you alone and miserable. They're trying to sabotage what we have. And Sienna, desperate to believe her life hadn't become a cage, chose Derek's narrative over her mother's concern. The Sunday phone calls became monthly, then occasional, then rare. By year 3, she'd seen her parents twice. They were losing their daughter. She was losing herself. The emotional abuse escalated like a storm that never breaks. Derek called her stupid when she forgot to buy his favorite brand of coffee. Worthless when she asked if they could visit her sister. Ungrateful when she mentioned missing her old job. He'd scream over nothing, a dish left in the sink, a television show she suggested, the way she'd said good morning. Then he'd go silent for days, stone-faced and cold, making her beg for forgiveness for crimes she couldn't even name. Sienna learned to walk on eggshells that never stopped cracking beneath her feet. She learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less. She learned that peace was temporary and pain was promised. The jealousy came next, paranoid and poisonous. If she smiled at a cashier, she was flirting. If she wore makeup to the grocery store, she was looking for attention. If she mentioned a male co-worker's name, she was cheating. Derek went through her phone every night, like he was searching for evidence in a crime he'd already convicted her of. He demanded her passwords, tracked her location, interrogated her about every minute she spent away from him. And when Sienna tried to confront him, tried to say this wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, wasn't love, he'd gaslight her so thoroughly she'd question her own sanity. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. I only act this way because you drive me crazy. If you really loved me, you wouldn't question me. And somehow, impossibly, Sienna started believing she was the problem. That she was too emotional, too difficult, too fundamentally broken to deserve anything better. 4 years in, Derek's hands became weapons. It started with grabbing her arm too hard during an argument, his fingers digging deep enough to leave purple shadows on her skin. Then shoving her into the wall when she disrespected him by asking where he'd been all night. Then, and this is when Sienna should have run, should have screamed, should have called someone, he slapped her across the face so hard her ears rang for an hour. She stood there, stunned, hand pressed to her burning cheek, unable to process that the man who'd once held her so gently had just hit her. And Derek, manipulative, calculating Derek, immediately broke down sobbing. "I'm so sorry, baby. You just pushed me too far. I love you so much. I can't lose you. Please forgive me. I'll change, I promise." And because Sienna was trauma-bonded and financially trapped and completely isolated from everyone who'd ever loved her, she forgave him. She made excuses. "He's stressed at work. I shouldn't have argued. It was just one time." But it was never just one time. The violence escalated like everything else had, slowly, then all at once. Hands around her throat during fights, squeezing until stars burst behind her eyes. Fists punched through walls inches from her head, a preview of what he could do to her if he wanted. Objects thrown, a phone, a glass, a lamp that shattered against the wall above where she cowered. And then the night he shoved her so hard she fell, skull cracking against the corner of the table, blood matting her hair, the world spinning into darkness. When she woke in the ER with a concussion, Derek was there holding her hand, telling the doctor she'd tripped, his grip on her fingers just tight enough to remind her what would happen if she told the truth. So she didn't. She lied. She protected him. She went home with him. She stayed. After each beating, Derek would become the man she'd fallen in love with again, apologetic, romantic, promising change he never intended to deliver. He'd buy her gifts she wasn't allowed to pick out, make her favorite dinner with ingredients he controlled the money to buy, hold her while she cried over the pain he'd caused. And Sienna would believe him desperately, pathetically, because believing him meant believing she hadn't wasted 6 years of her life on a monster. The cycle became her entire existence. Tension building, explosion, apology, honeymoon, repeat. She couldn't remember what peace felt like anymore. She couldn't remember who she'd been before Derek. That bright 22-year-old with dreams and friends and a future was gone, replaced by this hollow, frightened woman who'd stopped working because Derek demanded it, who had no friends because Derek destroyed them, who barely spoke to family because Derek had poisoned those relationships too. By 28, Sienna had become a ghost haunting her own life. She wore long sleeves in summer to hide the bruises. She lied to the few family members who still called, voice bright and fake, insisting everything was fine. She had no money of her own, no job, no social connections, no escape plan. Derek had convinced her that no one else would ever love her, that she was lucky he put up with her, that she deserved every punishment he gave. And the most devastating part, Sienna believed him. She believed she was too broken, too damaged, too worthless for anyone else to want. She believed she deserved the abuse. So, she stayed. For 6 years, she stayed. Until her 28th birthday, when Derek looked at her in the dress she'd carefully chosen and said, "You look like a slut. Go change." Until she quietly responded, "It's just a dress," and he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her up the stairs, screaming about disrespect and ingratitude. Until he threw her against the wall hard enough that her vision blacked out for a moment, told her she didn't deserve a birthday dinner, and left her crumpled on the bedroom floor, crying and bleeding and finally, broken in a way that somehow made her whole. Because lying there in the darkness, something inside Sienna cracked open, not in defeat, but in terrible crystalline clarity. And for the first time in 6 years, she let herself think the word that would save her life. Escape. But could she actually do it? Could a woman with no money, no friends, and nowhere to go really leave a man who'd promised to kill her if she ever tried? And even if she escaped his fists, could she ever escape the prison he'd built inside her mind? The morning after your life falls apart, you wake up and realize you have a choice: stay dead or start breathing again. Sienna made hers with shaking hands and a phone she wasn't supposed to use, dialing a number she'd almost forgotten, speaking words that felt like jumping off a cliff. "Maya, I need help." 3 hours later, her older sister was standing in Derek's apartment while he was at work, throwing clothes into garbage bags because suitcases would have taken too long, moving with the urgent efficiency of someone who knows the monster could come home any minute. They took Sienna's laptop, her phone charger, her grandmother's necklace, her birth certificate. They left behind everything else: the furniture Derek had chosen, the clothes he'd approved, the life he'd built around her like a tomb. And as Sienna walked out that door for the last time, carrying nothing but 2 trash bags and 6 years of trauma, she wasn't thinking about freedom or hope or new beginnings. She was thinking one single terrifying thought: he's going to find me. And when he does, he's going to kill me. Maya's house should have felt like sanctuary. 2 bedrooms, a garden out back, a guest room that hadn't been used in months. Sienna slept there for 2 weeks, or tried to sleep, which mostly meant lying awake listening to every car that passed, every door that closed in the neighborhood, every sound that could have been Derek coming to drag her back. Maya didn't ask questions those first few days. She just made tea Sienna didn't drink, cooked meals Sienna couldn't eat, and sat on the edge of the bed at 3 in the morning when the nightmares came and Sienna woke up screaming his name. But safety, Sienna was learning, isn't just a place. It's a feeling, and she didn't feel it. Not when Maya's husband John walked too quickly past her in the hallway, and Sienna flinched so hard she dropped her coffee mug. Not when Maya gently touched her shoulder, and Sienna's whole body went rigid with animal panic, and definitely not on day 14, when the pounding started on Maya's front door. The sound of Derek's fist against wood was exactly like the sound of Derek's fist against her body: violent, insistent, inevitable. "Sienna, Sienna, I know you're in there. Open this fucking door." Maya grabbed her phone, dialing 911 while John moved toward the door, not to open it, but to stand between it and Sienna, who'd collapsed on the living room floor, hyperventilating, transported back to every moment Derek had cornered her with nowhere to run. "You think you can just leave? You think you can hide from me? You're mine, Sienna. You'll always be mine." His voice carried through the walls like smoke, choking her. The police came. Derek ran, and Sienna got her first restraining order, a piece of paper that promised protection but felt as substantial as tissue in a hurricane. Because here's what they don't tell you about leaving an abuser: the physical escape is just the beginning. The real prison is in your head, and he's still got the keys. Derek violated that restraining order twice in 3 weeks, because men like Derek don't respect boundaries. That's why you had to leave them in the first place. First, he showed up at Maya's workplace, waiting by her car in the parking garage, telling her to talk sense into Sienna before she ruins both their lives. Maya called the police. Derek left before they arrived. Then he created fake social media accounts, dozens of them, each with a different name but all with the same message. I still love you. You're making a mistake. Come home. We can fix this. I'll change. I promise I'll change. And even though Sienna knew those words were lies wrapped in manipulation tied with abuse, even though she knew better, even though she'd lived through 6 years of broken promises, some part of her still wanted to believe him. That's what trauma does. It makes you doubt your own survival instinct. It makes you nostalgic for your own destruction. So Maya did what big sisters do when the world becomes too dangerous for the people they love. She helped Sienna disappear. A new city, 2 hours away, far enough that Derek wouldn't think to look there. A tiny one-bedroom apartment in a building with security cameras and a deadbolt that Sienna checked 17 times before she could sleep. A part-time job at a quiet bookstore where nobody asked about her past or why she jumped every time the door chimed. Maya helped her move, helped her set up, helped her survive those first few weeks when Sienna was convinced every stranger on the street was Derek in disguise. Every car following too closely was him tracking her down. Every phone notification was him finding a new way in. But eventually, inevitably, Maya had to go home. Had to return to her own life, her own family, her own world that didn't revolve around keeping Sienna alive. And for the first time in 6 years, Sienna was truly alone. Not Derek's version of alone, isolated and controlled, but actually alone. Free and terrified and completely unsure if she remembered how to be a person without someone telling her who to be. The PTSD didn't ask permission before it moved in. It showed up in every loud noise that sent Sienna diving under tables, every unexpected knock that triggered full-body panic attacks, every moment someone approached her too quickly and her nervous system screamed danger even when there was none. She couldn't watch romantic movies without having flashbacks, couldn't hear arguing through apartment walls without disassociating for hours, couldn't see couples holding hands without analyzing their body language for signs of control and fear. The grocery store became a minefield. Too many people, too many sounds, too many aisles where Derek could be waiting around the corner. She'd abandon full carts and run home, heart hammering, convinced she'd seen him when it was just a stranger with similar shoulders. The nightmares were worse. She dreamed she was back in that apartment, Derek's hands around her throat, waking up gasping and clawing at her own neck to remove fingers that weren't there. She dreamed she'd never left at all, that the escape was the dream, that she'd open her eyes and he'd be standing over her bed. She'd dream he'd found her new address, broken down her door, finished what he'd started. And even when she woke up safe in her own apartment, it would take hours to convince her body it wasn't still in danger. But Sienna was trying. God, she was trying so hard. She enrolled in an online graphic design certification program, returning to the creative passion Derek had systematically destroyed by calling her work childish and a waste of time. Her fingers felt clumsy on the design software at first, like she'd forgotten the language of creativity, but slowly, pixel by pixel, she started building something that was entirely hers. She took her bookstore paycheck, small but earned by her own hands, controlled by no one but herself, and bought art supplies, fresh vegetables, a lamp for her apartment that she chose because she liked it, not because anyone else approved. These tiny acts of autonomy felt revolutionary. She joined a support group for domestic violence survivors, sitting in a circle of women who understood without explanation why she couldn't sit with her back to the door, why she wore long sleeves even in summer, why the question why. Didn't you just leave? Made her want to scream. She reconnected with her parents over weekly video calls that always ended with her mother crying and her father saying, "I should have known, I should have seen it, I should have protected you," and Sienna having to comfort them for her own trauma. She went to therapy, or tried to, briefly, with a therapist who smiled too much and said things like, "Have you tried positive thinking? And just focus on the present moment." Advice that would have been helpful if Sienna's present moment didn't include debilitating flashbacks, and the bone-deep certainty that Derek would find her eventually. 1 year crawled by like this. 360 to 5 days of Sienna rebuilding herself from shattered pieces, never quite sure if she was doing it right, if healing was supposed to hurt this much, if she'd ever feel normal again, or if Derek had permanently rewired her brain to expect pain from love and danger from intimacy. The support group helped, but it wasn't enough. The nightmares weren't stopping. The panic attacks were getting worse. And then, during one particularly rough session where Sienna admitted she'd had 3 panic attacks that week just from seeing couples kiss on TV, the facilitator, a kind woman named Ruth who'd survived her own nightmare, said, "I think individual therapy might help. I know someone who specializes in trauma, specifically PTSD from domestic violence. His name's Adrian. He's good at this. Really good." Sienna's entire body resisted the idea. One-on-one therapy meant being alone in a room with a male therapist, which felt impossible, terrifying, absolutely out of the question. The support group was safe because there were witnesses, other women, exits she'd already mapped. But a closed door and a stranger who wanted to hear her secrets. Every survival instinct she'd developed screamed no. But she was also desperate, exhausted from carrying this weight alone, tired of being afraid of her own shadow. So she made the appointment, cancelled it, made it again, cancelled it again. Finally, on the 3rd try, she forced herself to show up, walking into the building on legs that felt like water, climbing stairs to the 3rd-floor office, standing outside a door that read Adrian Matthews, LMFT, for a full 5 minutes before she could make herself knock. But here's the question no one prepares you for when you've survived abuse. What happens when the person who's supposed to help you heal is exactly the kind of person you've learned to fear? A man, older than you, in a position of power, behind a closed door, with the ability to hurt you if he wanted to. How do you trust that? How do you walk into that room and not see every man who's ever hurt you staring back? The door opened, and Sienna's breath caught. Adrian Matthews was tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his early 30s. Everything about him should have triggered her panic response. But his eyes, warm, patient, understanding, didn't look at her the way Derek had, didn't assess her body or calculate her weakness or measure her compliance. He looked at her like she was a person, just a person. "Sienna, I'm Adrian, come in. You're safe here." His voice was gentle, not soft in the condescending way some people use with trauma survivors, but genuinely calm, like he understood that words could be weapons and he'd chosen to put his down. Sienna's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. She walked in, immediately scanned for exits, window, door, fire escape, positioned herself in the chair closest to the door because trapped meant danger, and she refused to be trapped again. She couldn't make eye contact, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Adrian didn't push. He sat down, maintaining distance, keeping his body language open and non-threatening. "I know this is scary. Sitting here with a stranger, being asked to talk about painful things. So let's establish some ground rules. First, you're in control of this session. You can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. Second, if at any point you need to stop, take a break, or leave, just say the word. No explanation needed. Third, nothing you tell me will shock me or make me judge you. I've worked with trauma survivors for years, and I promise you, there's nothing you could say that would make me think less of you. And fourth," he paused, making sure she was listening, "the door is always unlocked. You can leave whenever you want. You're not trapped here." That last sentence broke something open in Sienna's chest. "You're not trapped here." When was the last time someone had said that to her? When was the last time she'd believed it? She didn't tell him much that first session, just her name, her age, that she'd left an abusive relationship a year ago. Adrian didn't pry, didn't demand details or push for the full story or ask the horrible questions everyone else asked. Why didn't you leave sooner? What did you do to make him so angry? Are you sure it was really that bad? He just listened, nodded, and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. I know that took courage, And then he did something that changed everything. He told her about his mother. "I grew up watching my mom survive abuse, 15 years of it. I was 14 when she finally got us out. So I want you to know, I get it. Not from experience, but from proximity. I've seen what it does. I've seen how hard the leaving is, and how hard the staying away is, and how hard the healing is. And I'm here to help with that last part. If you'll let me." Something about knowing Adrian understood not theoretically from textbooks, but intimately from lived experience, made Sienna feel less alone. She scheduled another appointment, then another. Week by week, session by session, she started opening up, started telling him about Derek's escalation, about the financial control and isolation, about the first time Derek hit her and, every time after, started admitting the shame she carried, the guilt, the self-blame, all the toxic thoughts Derek had planted that had grown roots in her brain. "I feel so stupid," she whispered during their 5th session. "Everyone says, 'Why didn't you just leave?' And I don't know how to explain that leaving felt impossible, that he'd convinced me I was nothing without him. That the first deserved it, that no one else would ever want me." Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and certain. "You're not stupid, Sienna. You're a survivor. What you experienced was systematic psychological manipulation combined with physical violence. Derek didn't just hit you, he systematically destroyed your sense of self, your support system, your financial independence, your reality. That's not something you just leave. That's something you have to escape from with planning and courage and help. And you did it. You got out. That makes you one of the strongest people I've ever met." And for the first time in 7 years, Sienna started believing that maybe, possibly, she wasn't the broken thing Derek had convinced her she was. Maybe she was just a person who'd survived the unsurvivable and was still standing. Months passed like this. Sienna's panic attacks decreased from daily to weekly to occasional. Her nightmares, while still present, lost some of their power. She learned grounding techniques, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, that pulled her back from flashbacks. She learned that triggers weren't weaknesses but biological responses to trauma, and that healing wasn't linear. Some days she felt strong, other days she couldn't get out of bed. Adrian reminded her that both were okay, that recovery wasn't a straight line but a messy, complicated journey with setbacks and progress and everything in between. She started to feel like herself again. Not the girl she'd been at 22. That version of Sienna was gone, and grief for her was part of the healing. But a new version. Scarred, but standing. Wounded, but whole. And then, during a session about 8 months in, Sienna realized something that terrified her more than any of Derek's violence had. She was developing feelings for her therapist. It started innocently enough, looking forward to their sessions, thinking about things he'd said, feeling disappointed when they had to cancel for his vacation. But it had grown into something bigger, something dangerous. She found herself noticing his hands, gentle and careful as they held his coffee mug. His smile when she shared a breakthrough. The way he listened like her words mattered, like she mattered. This was textbook transference, she knew that. It was normal for trauma survivors to develop feelings for their therapists. The first safe man in years, the first person who listened without judgment, the first relationship that felt healthy and boundaried and respectful. But knowing it was transference didn't make the feelings less real. And it definitely didn't make them less terrifying. Because how do you tell the difference between healing and falling, between gratitude and love, between safety and attraction? And what happens when the only man you've trusted in years is the one man you absolutely cannot have? Sienna decided she was ready to end regular therapy. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had made significant progress, but the real reason was simpler and more complicated. She couldn't keep sitting in that office, falling for someone she could never be with, building fantasies around a relationship that was fundamentally professional and therefore impossible. So she told Adrian she wanted to transition to occasional check-ins, that she felt strong enough to manage on her own. And Adrian, being the ethical therapist he was, agreed. He was proud of her progress. They scheduled one final session to wrap up, which felt like a breakup Sienna hadn't agreed to have. That last session was torture. They reviewed her progress, discussed her ongoing healing plan, talked about warning signs to watch for in future relationships. Advice Sienna barely heard because she was too busy memorizing his face, knowing she wouldn't see it again, feeling loss for something she'd never actually had. As she stood to leave, hand on the doorknob, she made a decision that was either the bravest or stupidest thing she'd done since leaving Derek. She turned back. "Can I ask you something personal?" Adrian looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." Sienna's heart was hammering. "Why do you do this work? Trauma therapy. Most people would find it too heavy, too painful. Why this?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he decided on honesty. "My mom was in an abusive relationship for 15 years. I told you that, but I didn't tell you all of it. I was just a kid, watching it happen, unable to stop it. When she finally left, when I was 14, we lived in a women's shelter for months. I watched her heal, watched her become strong again, and I decided I wanted to help other people do the same. So every person I help," he paused, voice thick with emotion, "is me helping my mom in retrospect, doing for others what I couldn't do for her when I was young and powerless." Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "She's lucky to have you as a son." Adrian smiled softly. "I'm lucky she was brave enough to leave. She taught me what strength really looks like, what survival really means." There was a long pause, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Then Sienna took a breath and jumped. Would it be inappropriate if I asked if you'd like to get coffee sometime? Not as a therapist, not as a client, just as people, as adults who maybe—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise, consideration, something that looked like hope. He'd grown to care about Sienna deeply over these months. Her strength, her resilience, her kindness, despite everything she'd survived. He'd noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way she laughed when something surprised her, the way she'd slowly come back to life session by session. He'd been careful not to cross professional boundaries, but now, with their therapeutic relationship officially ending, the barrier that had kept them apart was dissolving. He could say yes. He should say yes. But should he? Was it possible to build something real with someone who'd first known you as her therapist? Could a relationship born from trauma ever be about more than healing? "I'd really like that," Adrian finally said, and Sienna felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. They started slowly, carefully, two people who understood exactly how badly relationships could go wrong. Coffee at neutral locations, walks in public parks, conversations about everything except therapy, trauma, Derek, abuse. Sienna learned that Adrian loved terrible puns and didn't understand his own phone and made the best scrambled eggs she'd ever tasted. Adrian learned that Sienna was wickedly funny when she felt safe, that she loved thunderstorms and old bookstores and documentaries about art history, that she was working on a graphic design portfolio that was genuinely impressive. They were getting to know each other as people, not as therapist and client, not as trauma survivor and healer, just Adrian and Sienna. Two humans trying something that felt impossibly scary and impossibly right. But trauma doesn't let go easily. On their 4th date, they were at Adrian's apartment watching a movie when the male lead raised his voice in an argument scene, not even yelling, just emphatic, and Sienna flinched so hard she spilled her drink. Adrian noticed immediately, reaching to help, and Sienna scrambled backward off the couch, eyes wide, transported somewhere else entirely. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" And then she stopped, realizing what she was doing, apologizing reflexively, anticipating punishment that wasn't coming. Adrian stayed where he was, giving her space, voice calm. "You're okay. You're safe. It was just the movie. I'm not angry." But Sienna was already crying, humiliated and frustrated, and so tired of this, so tired of being broken. And in that moment, she had to wonder, would she ever stop flinching? Would she ever be able to love someone without her past contaminating everything? Was it fair to ask Adrian to love someone who might never fully heal? What does it take for someone who's forgotten how to trust to finally believe in love again? That question hung in the air between Sienna and Adrian that night as she stood in his living room, crying over spilled soda and a movie scene that had transported her back to hell. She expected him to be frustrated, tired, done with her brokenness. That's what Derek had taught her, that her trauma was a burden, that her triggers were manipulation, that her healing was taking too long. But Adrian just stayed where he was, giving her space, his voice steady and kind. "Come here," he said gently, not moving toward her, just opening his arms in invitation, letting her choose. And Sienna, shaking, ashamed, exhausted from fighting her own nervous system coast to walk into them. She chose to let someone hold her while she cried. She chose to believe, just for a moment, that maybe safety was real. Adrian didn't try to fix her that night. He didn't offer empty platitudes, or tell her to just move on, or suggest she was being too sensitive. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair with the kind of gentleness that made her cry harder because it was so foreign, so opposite of everything she'd known. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, starting to apologize again, Adrian stopped her. "Sienna, listen to me. You don't have to apologize for your trauma responses. You don't have to be embarrassed. Your brain is protecting you from danger it learned to expect. That's not weakness, that's survival." He paused, making sure she was looking at him. "I know this is hard. I know you're afraid of being too broken for love. But you're not broken, you're healing. And healing looks messy sometimes. That's okay. I'm not going anywhere." Those last 4 words changed everything. "I'm not going anywhere." Derek had said similar things, but always as a threat. "You can't leave me, you'll never escape me, I'll find you wherever you go." But when Adrian said it, he meant something entirely different. "You can't scare me away with your trauma, you can't push me away with your pain. I'm choosing to stay not because I'm controlling you, but because I care about you." It was the first time Sienna understood that staying could be about love instead of possession. That commitment could feel like safety instead of a trap. They kept dating, slowly building something that felt different from anything Sienna had experienced. Adrian never raised his voice, not even in excitement or laughter. He'd learned to modulate his tone around her, not because she'd asked, but because he noticed it helped her feel safe. He always asked before touching her, even after months together. "Can I hold your hand? Can I hug you? Is this okay?" Giving her agency over her own body in a way Derek never had. He was consistent and predictable, showing up when he said he would, calling when he said he'd call, never playing mind games or using the silent treatment or making her guess what he was feeling. And when Sienna had bad days, when the nightmares came back, or a trigger sent her spiraling, or she needed to cancel plans because her anxiety was too high, Adrian just adjusted. No guilt trips, no punishment, no resentment. He was teaching her what healthy love looked like, one patient moment at a time. But the real test came 6 months into their relationship, on a random Tuesday night that started ordinary and ended with Sienna screaming. She was asleep at her apartment, Adrian beside her. They'd started staying over at each other's places, an intimacy that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The nightmare came without warning, as they always did. In it, she was back in that bedroom on her 28th birthday, Derek's hand in her hair, dragging her up the stairs, his voice screaming that she was worthless, ungrateful, his. She could feel the wall against her back, the pain in her scalp, the certainty that she'd never escape. She woke up gasping, disoriented, and for one horrible moment, she didn't know where she was. Didn't know who the man in bed next to her was. Saw only threat, only danger, only Derek. Adrian woke to Sienna scrambling away from him, pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide and unfocused, breathing in shallow, panicked gasps. He'd seen panic attacks before, in his clients, in his mother, in other survivors, but seeing Sienna trapped in one felt different, more urgent, more painful. He wanted to help, to comfort, to fix it. But he knew better than to approach, to touch, to crowd her when her nervous system thought she was fighting for her life. So he stayed where he was, kept his voice low and calm, and started talking her through it. "Sienna, you're safe. It's Adrian. You're in your apartment. You're not with Derek. He's not here. You're safe. He repeated it like a mantra, giving her something to anchor to, a voice to follow out of the nightmare and back to reality. Slowly, agonizingly, her breathing slowed, her eyes focused. She recognized him. And then came the shame. Sienna pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, making herself small. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice raw. "I'm sorry. I thought I was past this. I thought I was getting better." Adrian's heart broke for her, for the way trauma made her apologize for surviving, for the way Derek had taught her that her pain was an inconvenience to manage rather than a wound that deserved compassion. He moved slowly, telegraphing his movements, sitting on the edge of the bed at a distance. "You are getting better. Healing isn't linear, remember? You're allowed to have hard days. You're allowed to have nightmares. That doesn't erase all the progress you've made." But Sienna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Aren't you tired of this? Of me being like this, broken and scared?" And she couldn't finish, the words catching in her throat. Adrian looked at her with such tenderness it physically hurt. "Sienna." He waited until she met his eyes. "You're not broken. Listen to me. You survived something most people couldn't. You escaped a situation designed to trap you forever. You rebuilt your entire life from nothing. You had the courage to let yourself trust again, to try this with me even though every instinct told you relationships were dangerous. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known." He shifted slightly closer, still giving her space. "I don't see you as a collection of trauma responses or triggers or panic attacks. When I look at you, I see the woman who laughs at terrible puns and lights up when she talks about design work. I see someone who's kind to every customer at the bookstore, who calls her sister every Sunday, who's building something beautiful from the wreckage of what Derek tried to destroy. I see the whole you, the healed parts and the parts still healing. And I'm not here to fix you, Sienna. I'm here because I care about you. All of you." Sienna stared at him, this man who'd somehow learned to love the sharp edges of her without trying to file them down, who met her trauma with patience instead of frustration, who saw her panic attacks not as manipulation but as evidence of survival. "I've never felt safe with someone before," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not like this. Not without fear underneath it. With Derek, even the good moments had this undercurrent of dread, like I was always waiting for it to turn bad. But with you—" She paused, trying to find words for something she'd never experienced. "With you, I just feel safe, actually safe." Adrian smiled, gentle and real. "You deserve to feel safe, Sienna, always. In every relationship, in every moment. Safety isn't something you should have to earn or fight for or be grateful for. It's the bare minimum. It's the foundation." He held out his hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. "Can I hold you?" Sienna nodded, and when his arms wrapped around her, she didn't flinch, didn't tense, just breathed and let herself be held, and understood for the first time that real love doesn't hurt. It heals. The months that followed were marked by small victories that felt monumental. Sienna finished her graphic design certification and launched her own freelance business, taking on clients and building a portfolio that was entirely hers. The first time she deposited money into her own bank account, money she'd earned, that no one else controlled, that was hers to spend however she wanted. She cried in her car for 20 minutes. Financial independence, she was learning, wasn't just about money. It was about autonomy, agency, the power to leave if you needed to, because you could survive on your own. She reconnected fully with her family, spending holidays at her parents' house with Maya and her kids, rebuilding relationships Derek had nearly destroyed. Her father apologized again for not seeing the signs, and Sienna finally had the strength to tell him it wasn't his fault, that abusers are designed to be invisible until it's too late. She even started volunteering at the domestic violence shelter, the same organization that had helped her mother and Adrian's mother years ago. Once a week, Sienna sat with women who were where she'd been a year ago, terrified, ashamed, convinced they deserved the abuse or were too broken to leave. And she told them her story. Not all of it, not the graphic details, but enough. Enough for them to see that she'd survived, that she'd escaped, that she was building a life on the other side of horror. "You're not too damaged for love," she'd tell them. the same words Adrian had told her. You're surviving, and that makes you stronger than you know. But the real moment of transformation came on an ordinary Saturday morning, 14 months after she'd left Derek. Sienna was at Adrian's apartment, making coffee in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, completely comfortable in the space and the relationship, and her own skin in a way that would have been impossible a year ago. She looked out the window at the city waking up, sunlight streaming through the glass, and realized something profound. She was happy. Not just okay, not just surviving, but actually genuinely happy. The panic attacks had become rare, the nightmares less frequent, the triggers more manageable. She'd learned to recognize trauma responses when they happened and ground herself back to reality. She'd learned the difference between healthy conflict and abuse, between someone expressing hurt feelings and someone weaponizing guilt. She'd learned that she could trust herself to recognize red flags, that Derek hadn't permanently broken her danger radar. He'd just been skilled at camouflaging himself as safe. Adrian walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. A year ago, that would have triggered her. Now, she just leaned back into him, comfortable and calm. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. Sienna smiled, covering his hands with hers. "I'm thinking about how I used to believe I was too broken for this, for love that feels safe, for a relationship where I'm not constantly walking on eggshells, for someone who sees my trauma as something I survived rather than something I caused." She turned to face him. "Thank you for being patient with me, for never making me feel like my healing was an inconvenience, for teaching me what healthy love looks like." Adrian cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You did the hard work, Sienna. I just walked alongside you. And for the record, you were never too broken. You were always whole, just wounded. There's a difference." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "I'm proud of you, for leaving, for surviving, for choosing to heal, for letting yourself trust again. You're incredible." And standing there in that sun-filled kitchen, being held by someone who'd never once made her feel afraid, Sienna understood something crucial. Your past doesn't define your future. Derek had tried to destroy her, but he'd failed. She'd escaped, survived, and rebuilt. She'd proven that leaving was possible, that healing was real, that love could feel safe instead of scary. She wasn't the broken girl Derek had tried to convince her she was. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd walked through hell and came out the other side stronger, wiser, more beautiful for the scars she carried. 6 months later, at a domestic violence awareness event where Sienna shared her story publicly for the first time, she stood on stage in front of hundreds of people and said the words she wished someone had told her 7 years ago. "If you're in an abusive relationship, please hear me. It's not your fault. You don't deserve it. You're not too broken to leave or too damaged for love. Abuse doesn't make you weak. Surviving it makes you strong. And I promise you, there is life on the other side. There is healing. There is love that doesn't hurt. There is a version of yourself you haven't met yet, who's free and happy and safe, and she's waiting for you to be brave enough to fight for her." The applause was deafening, but Sienna only heard Adrian's voice from the front row, cheering louder than anyone else, proud of the woman she'd become. Because here's the truth. They don't tell you about surviving abuse. You don't just escape the relationship. You escape the person abuse convinced you that you were, worthless, broken, unlovable. And you become the person you were always meant to be, strong, whole, worthy of real love. Sienna's story isn't just about escaping Derek. It's about reclaiming herself. It's about learning that love shouldn't hurt, that safety is a right, not a privilege, that healing is possible even when it feels impossible. It's about proving that your worst chapter doesn't have to define your story. It's about becoming the hero of your own life. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever loved someone who was healing from trauma? Have you survived something that made you believe you were too broken for love? What would you tell your younger self about recognizing red flags, leaving dangerous situations, or believing in your own strength? Share your story in the comments below, because someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone, that survival is possible, that they deserve love that feels safe. And if this story helped you, if it gave you hope or courage or understanding, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep sharing these important stories together. Remember, you're not broken, you're surviving, and that makes you stronger than you know.